Hello and welcome to the webinar on navigating higher education for students with autism. Before we introduce the speaker, I want to take a moment to tell you about a few upcoming events and programs here at the Johnson Center. I know many of you are listening in from afar and may not be able to attend local events or programs, and that's one of the main reasons we provide these webinar series. Parents and professionals alike can register for any of our free webinars and have access to some helpful topics and experienced presenters. We host multiple webinars per month, so please visit our website at www.johnson-center.org to view the current 2016 schedule. We are adding more exciting webinars to this year's series, so if you're not on our email list, I encourage you to visit our website and click on the Join Our Email List link that appears on the homepage. To get instant news and events from the Johnson Center, you can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter, as we often announce grant and scholarship opportunities, research opportunities, and last-minute events and presentations there. You can find links for these on our website as well. We do have a couple of exciting events coming up here in Austin. Our wonderful SIB Camp program is hosting the first camp of 2016 coming up this March during spring break. Sibling ages 8 to 10 will have an amazing time while learning important information. Camps for other age groups will be available this summer, so you can contact us for more information. The Johnson Center is also participating in Amplify Austin this March. We will be raising awareness and critical funds for social skills groups for people with autism and sibling groups for their brothers and sisters. Visit amplifyatx.org for more information. And be sure to follow our colleagues at the Autism Research Institute as they host their own webinar initiative and share some great resources on their website and social media pages. Before we begin, please note that any questions may be typed into your control panel throughout the presentation, and time permitting, they'll be addressed during the presentation. Also, for those of you that have requested copies of the presentation, we don't send out presentation slides, but we do post recordings of all of our webinars on the Johnson Center YouTube channel. Please search for us on YouTube as the Johnson Center and subscribe to get full access to all of our webinars. Additional resources and information are also going to be available on our blog found at our website, www.johnson-center.org. We are offering certificates of attendance for this webinar, and a link to complete a short quiz will be emailed to you following the presentation. Today's webinar is being presented by Dr. Claire Schutte, the staff psychologist here at the Johnson Center. She graduated with honors from the University of Florida with a bachelor's in psychology and a minor in general education. She completed graduate training at the Florida Institute of Technology, completing a doctoral degree in clinical psychology and a master's degree in applied behavioral analysis. Dr. Schutte has treated a diverse population of children, adolescents, and adults in a variety of clinical settings, including community clinics, college counseling centers, psychiatric hospitals, private practice, and private treatment programs. She has extensive experience in the area of child and adult psychological evaluation and assessment, and completed a postdoctoral residency in psychological evaluation. Her graduate training led Dr. Schutte to discover an interest in helping individuals with autism and developmental disorders. She has provided individual therapy, group therapy, and social skills trainings to individuals on the autism spectrum and is an essential member of the Johnson Center team. Now please welcome our presenter, Dr. Schutte.
Hello everyone, thank you for joining me today. I'm looking forward to talking with you about navigating support in post-secondary education for individuals with autism spectrum disorders. I'd like to start off with having everyone read this quote, so if you'd like to take a moment to read it to yourself. Okay, sorry about that. I think the screen froze for a moment. But if everyone can read this quote to themselves. And I like this quote because it points to the many reasons that college is important. College not only helps carve a path for success in the future in a student's career, but it also helps develop important areas such as the student's independence. It provides unique experiences and helps develop friendships. And this is true for all high school students that are going off to college. So do people with autism go to college? Yes, they do. According to a study done in 2012, it showed that 1 in 3 teens with autism goes to a 2 or 4-year college program. And I believe that many more could with the right guidance and support. There was a caveat to this study that showed that students with autism were less likely to graduate from college than their peers. So a lot of what we're going to talk about today is tools and supports that can help keep a student with autism in college and help them succeed. When students graduate from high school, there's many different paths that they can take, and today we're going to be talking about the path to higher education or to college. This is a pretty in-depth and broad topic, and it involves a lot of different factors, such as academic supports, independent living, and I really have tried to narrow the focus of today's presentation on talking about specific supports that are available in the higher education environment. We do have previous webinars that are on the topic of independent living, for example, and if you'd like to get a more in-depth understanding about supports for independent living, please see our YouTube channel that has all of our previous webinars on there. And later this year, we're also going to have a presentation targeted at information specifically for college faculty and staff and how they can help best support students or their students with autism. Today, I'd like to go over our agenda. We're going to be talking about planning, so everything involved in the planning of the transition to college. Also, options to look at for colleges and how to find the best fit. Tips for applying to college. And I feel the most important area is supports that are available and that should be considered for students with autism. Let's start off with talking about the planning area. Several different factors have been identified for helping facilitate the transition to college. I'm going to go over some that are outlined in a book called Success Beyond the Classroom. And these are planning, finding the right fit in terms of the individual student and what college environment or program is going to be best for the student, self-determination and motivation of the student, self-management, technology use, internships and career activities, as well as support. When we talk about planning, part of the planning process is understanding the differences between high school and college. This is a pretty significant change. It comes with a lot of excitement for many students, but it is important to have an understanding of all of the differences that a student's going to be dealing with. Here's a little bit of humor to get us started in terms of understanding the differences. If you do have a child that is getting close to going off to college or has already transitioned to college, you might be able to relate to this. But a lot of times the transition can also be hard for parents. Your child might kind of be like, "See you later, Mom," or they might have some anxiety themselves. So some of the big changes when a student goes from high school to college is that there's no longer an IEP in the college setting. So the level of support, it transitions or shifts from the Individuals with Disabilities Act to the Rehabilitation Act in Section 504, as well as the Americans with Disabilities Act. But there isn't that big area of support provided by an IEP. So that's a pretty significant change. Another big change is that when students go off to college and once they turn 18, they're considered adults. So a lot of information about the student becomes confidential and isn't just openly shared with parents. And there are legal differences in what information can be shared. Also, a lot of self-advocacy is needed with the transition. So students are responsible for initiating different supports and accessing those. And then there's much higher expectations in college. Students are expected to be more independent. There's also a ton of environmental changes. So as you can see in this picture, this is a very big auditorium-sized classroom that's very typical on college campuses. Some are even bigger than this, and a student might be in a class with hundreds of other students. So there's larger class sizes. A lot of times there's less one-on-one help from instructors. As you can see in a class of this size, it's going to be hard for one professor to provide much one-on-one support. A lot of classes these days are offered online, so that can create its own unique challenges. I still remember in college we didn't have online courses, but we had classes on tape, and I'd have friends that would have giant stacks of VHS tapes that had built up of classes that they'd have to watch before their next test. That isn't the best way to do it, and it is easy to fall behind with some of those online courses if you're not typically one to keep up with those and having that one-on-one support from a professor making you watch the classes. Another change that can be present is that oftentimes there's fewer tests for a higher percentage of the grade. So doing bad on one test could impact the grade for the final grade for the entire class. And that kind of falls into those higher expectation changes as well. Going to college, I like to think of it as bringing with it a dose of reality. So we have an acronym here for reality. R for responsibility. There's no one making you get up and go to class in college, so there is a higher level of responsibility needed. E for executive functioning. Executive functioning, it refers to different cognitive processes and skills that are related mostly to organization, time management, and planning ahead. So that area really, increases in demand in the college setting. You have to, plan ahead for classes, stay organized, get up on time, give yourself enough time to get to class. A is for advocacy. As I mentioned before, students are responsible or more responsible for speaking up for their needs and initiating supports and advocating for themselves. L is for life skills. College requires a huge shift in terms of life skills. So, for example, knowing your social security number, knowing how to budget and things like that. I, independent living. This is another big change. So students are oftentimes responsible for knowing how to go grocery shopping, making sure they eat, cooking, not eating cereal for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, for example. I'm sure that happens. T for transportation and travel. Students oftentimes are required to learn the bus system on campus, know where their classes are, how much time it takes to walk to class, finding them. And then Y is for youth and inexperience. There's really only so much you can learn until you do it and experience it. And high school students do have a level of naivete when they're going into college and do have to learn some of those life experiences as they go through it. So again, this reality acronym can help you remember kind of that dose of reality that college students have to learn when they make that huge jump. Now, these big changes, they can seem somewhat scary because they are significant changes that have to occur, but it's definitely doable, and it's important to start with small steps to help facilitate this big transition. So this planning process, it should start in high school with supports continuing throughout the transition. So I want to talk a little bit about the IEP transition plan. This starts in high school, typically by at least the age of 16. And it involves the IEP transition meeting. There will be an initial meeting as well as follow-up transition meetings involved in the IEP transition plan. And several things are covered in this meeting. So in the meeting, goals will be set. So this might be goals that include what's needed for successful transition, specific needs in terms of any instruction related to the transition. For example, does the student need to learn any particular skills? What related services might be helpful? For example, would some type of social support be helpful in aiding in the transition? It might also include community experiences, such as a work-study program, so that the student can learn particular skills before, as well as how you can continue current supports. Also, measurable goals will be developed. It's important that transition goals can be observed and measured or counted. Otherwise, it's hard to keep track of these and they can be too vague and progress is too difficult to be monitored. So again, goals should be measurable and observable. And then it's very important that the student is involved in the process. So this might include person-centered planning, which is basically what the name implies. It's involving the student in the planning process. And really having an open discussion of what the student wants. What are their specific interests? What are their goals and hopes for their future? What strengths is the student coming in with, and what skills do they have that we can kind of focus on? And what is their passion? I think focusing on the interest and passion of the student can really help with their intrinsic motivation, and that motivation is really a key to success in terms of helping them continue and really lead to the best outcome in completing college or whatever program they're transitioning to. One way to identify different areas of support and goals for the IEP transition plan is through an evaluation or an assessment before the transition occurs as part of the planning process. So there are several different areas that should be considered when planning. Some of the broad areas are academic, social, and independent living. So you want to really focus and narrow into these different areas and identify what are the students' strengths and what areas do we need to help support to facilitate their success in the transition. I'm going to go through some specific assessment areas that can be included. And when we're thinking about assessment or an evaluation, most of you, or those of you that have students that have an IEP, you're familiar with educational evaluations that are provided through the school. Several similar areas can be included as part of the transition evaluation, such as academic skills, interests, study skills, and all of these are more related to transitions compared to what their previous educational evaluations might have looked like. Executive functioning, specific goals, social functioning, and all of these you're going to use a variety of different assessments, but we're looking again, what are their strengths in these areas and what areas do we need to work on? For example, how are their current study skills and are these going to translate to the college environment? Are there any specific skills we can work on now that are going to help them succeed in some of their classes? Communication functioning and gaining a good understanding of the student's communication style. For example, will anything related to their communication impact what accommodations or modifications they might need in the classroom environment when they go to college? Are there any behavioral challenges that we need to work on or set up a behavior plan for? Does the student have any sensory needs that we need to plan for? When we talked and looked at that auditorium-sized classroom, you can see that it's filled with lots of students. There's likely going to be some distracting noise or lights, and depending on the student, they might have some sensory sensitivities, for example, that can be kept in mind for certain accommodations in the classroom. One might be that if one of those large classrooms is too distracting, the student might do better taking tests in a low distraction environment. Another area that's important to look into is independent living skills, as well as coping skills and stress management. As part of the evaluation process, both formal and informal assessments can be used for this, and both are helpful in their own ways. Some examples of different formal assessments that can be used, and I'd like to go over a few that are more transition focused. Some of them are the Strong Interest Inventory and the Campbell Interest and Skills Survey. These are both assessments that the student completes themselves, and they're focused on what the student's interests are, and they can really help in terms of choosing a major, for example, and helping guide the student's path in terms of majors and careers. I like the Campbell Interest and Skills Survey because it focuses both on interests as well as skill strengths and takes both of the information into consideration. And then there's also some assessments now that are geared specifically for transition. One of them is the Brigance Transition Skills Inventory. In this one, for example, it looks at broad areas related to transition, such as academic skills, post-secondary opportunities, independent living skills, as well as community participation. Another similar example is the Transition Planning Inventory. So all of these assessments can help assess some of these areas, particularly related to the transition areas, and then you might include an academic achievement assessment to look specifically at academic skills, or an executive functioning questionnaire to look at organization and planning skills. So you want to come up with a battery or a grouping of assessments to really touch on all of these areas. Also useful are informal assessments. So these would be gathering information not from formal tests, but things such as interviewing the teacher. Teachers are great resources, as are parents and therapists who have worked with the student. So asking them about what they've noticed in terms of the student's needs and how we might best support the student in transitioning to college. There's also informal questionnaires. You could come up with your own questionnaire or use a more informal measure. Observation is another wonderful tool. So observing the student, for example, in a life skills class or observing them in a work study program, and really seeing in real life what they're doing well at and what areas you can focus on. So once you've completed all of the information gathering process, you want to come up with a formal plan. And this is going to be a work in progress, but a formal transition plan as part of the general IEP transition planning process. So you want to have a formal idea of what the needs are, what supports the student needs to help facilitate the transition. This should also include those measurable goals, a timeline with necessary steps, things like important dates. And what I would recommend is creating a big binder with all of this necessary information and breaking it into relevant sections such as test preparation, specific schools you're looking at, independent living goals and supports, but really getting organized and coming up with that formal transition plan is important. So back to our agenda for today. We've gone over the planning process and how to break up the planning into smaller steps and use assessment to help identify those goals and create the blueprint for the transition. Now I'd like to talk about what options are available for students with autism who are transitioning to college. And how to select a school. I think it can be overwhelming. There's so many hundreds of colleges and programs and different types of educational environments. So it does take some work in terms of doing your research and figuring out what's going to be the best fit for the student. You're going to be gathering lots of information. This might be from the internet, from resource books and magazines, doing campus visits, talking to other parents who have had students with autism transition to college. They can be a great resource, as well as school counselors or other people who have worked with the student. It might also be helpful to narrow the search by what's important and what's going to be the best fit for the student. For example, if you've decided already that that the student wants to stay close to home, for example, or go to college in a specific location, you're going to narrow your search in that area. Or you might be looking for colleges with a particular program or college. For example, if you're only looking at computer science, for example, or you might narrow the search by looking at what supports are available. For example, only looking at colleges that have specific programs for students with autism. Another helpful thing to do in researching programs is to meet with faculty. So this would likely include meeting with faculty of the college that the student is interested in, asking any relevant questions, talking to them about the program, maybe getting tips for the student on what the teacher has seen in terms of things that help. Meeting with students. A lot of times college students are involved in the orientation process or giving campus tours and things like that. So current students can be a great source of support for learning different things about the college. And again, when you're researching the programs, use some type of book or binder, other organized method for jotting down all of your notes. So in that binder that I mentioned before, you might have a section on different college programs. And for each college, you're going to want to log notes about them, descriptions, pros and cons, and any other relevant information to you. There's lots of different types of college settings to decide between, and again, I want to emphasize the best fit for the student. Some examples of the options are traditional colleges and four-year universities. Community colleges are another option, as well as vocational and technical schools. So the student might want to focus on a specific trade, and so a vocational or technical school might be more appropriate, or a specialized school, such as a school specifically for music. There's a ton of other factors to consider when looking at the school type or what college setting would be most appropriate. And I just want to review what some of these factors to consider are. And when you're thinking about that binder or a book that you're creating of the different choices, these are some things that you might want to jot down notes on. So what type of school? We just went over those. The type of campus is important to consider, such as the size. Is it urban or suburban? Is it in a more rural area or residential? Is it considered a commuter college? Also the location, how close to home is it? How close to resources? Will it be easy for the student to go to a grocery store, for example? What living options do they have, such as dorms, suites? Do they have off-campus housing? Is the student going to live at home? Also, and importantly, what programs and majors do they have, and how do these fit with the student's strengths and interests? What personal interests do they have, and how does the college fit with that? Campus culture, the student-to-teacher ratio is also important. Some colleges are going to have larger class sizes compared to smaller. Are there full-time versus part-time options? And importantly, what support programs are available? Some other things to keep in mind are extracurricular options, such as financial aid. What orientation do they provide, as well as services provided through the Office of Disability Services. So I want to take a moment to hear from the audience and just take a few questions. I'm going to try to pick some that are based on the two areas of the agenda that we've already covered, including planning and options. So I'm just going to take a moment to choose a few questions. Okay, here's a great one. This question asks, what are some examples of measurable IEP transition goals? Earlier, I referred to coming up with goals that are measurable and observable. So let me think of a measurable and observable transition goal real quick. Okay, so one might be, when arriving at class, the student will have all of their necessary materials, including their binder, books, and pens ready. 9 out of 10 opportunities by this date. So that goal right there is observable. You can observe if the student has all of those listed class materials with them. You can also take data on how often they do, so you know if they're reaching that goal of 9 out of 10 opportunities. And you can also observe and keep track of if they're meeting that goal by a particular date. Let's see, another example of a measurable goal might be the student will develop with their counselor or career resource guide 5 different programs in the area of computer science that they're interested in attending, and they'll take notes on each program. So again, that would be an observable goal. So good question. Let's see. I think I've answered this one, but this one asks, once an assessment is done for the IEP transition planning, what is done with the results? I think an important point to make is that if the school is going through all of the effort to do a thorough evaluation and getting all of the results from the relevant assessments, it's important that you're doing something with those results. Again, the results of all of those tests really can help create a blueprint for the planning process and what areas the student needs support. So let's say, for example, one of the transition assessments identifies a really clear need in the area of independent living skills. During the planning process, a lot of goals related to independent living should be created. So you're really pulling from that evaluation specific areas that should be worked on and kind of using it to create that blueprint for moving forward. Okay, well, let's move into the next areas of our agenda for today. We've talked about planning, options, and now I want to go over some tips on the application process. When you're researching programs, you want to find out what you need in terms of the application. So is a high school diploma or a GED necessary? Are there certain course credits that are required? What documentation is needed to determine any eligibility for accommodations? And some ways to prepare for the application process are doing some essay preparation. Essays can be difficult for any student. A lot of times for students with autism, they might be even more challenging. So really providing support and working ahead on the essays is important. Gathering letters of recommendation from teachers or people who have worked with the student. Prepping for entrance exams such as the SAT or the ACT. An example is the PSAT, which is a practice SAT. There's also different preparatory classes that can be taken. These can be in person, online, or study guides. Parents also have to prepare for the process. Forms must be filled out, such as the Students with Disabilities Eligibility Form, in order to receive certain accommodations for testing. And it's also important for parents to look into the differences between the different tests because documentation and the processes for getting accommodations can be different, for example, between the ACT and the SAT. As well as practicing for any interviews. Some colleges require interviews, and this is an important area for students to practice because some of those, just the social environment of interviews, as well as advocating for themselves, asking questions, and practicing their nonverbals and things like that is really important. With applying, the issue of disclosure comes up, and this is kind of a tricky area of whether or not you should disclose or not disclose that the student has autism. Really, this is a personal choice, and there is no right or wrong answer. It boils down to what's best for the student. It's not necessary in the application, and it's not included in applications. However, some students do choose to include or disclose that they have autism in their essays or letters of recommendation. And sometimes this can be a positive thing in terms of talking about their story. And really, disclosure, it's only necessary once the student is accepted and they're seeking special services or academic accommodations. One resource that I like that focuses a lot on advocacy is Ask and Tell. The title is called Ask and Tell. I know that Stephen Shore is one of the authors of that book, but it is a good resource about disclosure, and they do talk a lot about self-advocacy as well. You also want to think about different academic considerations in the application process. Or, for example, are there specific academic requirements such as math, science, and language requirements, or requirements for particular programs? What academic preparedness is needed? And what supports have been provided academically so far? And can we provide this level in the college environment? So that was kind of a quick overview of the application process. And I want to move us into support, and we're going to finish up with this, and this is a very important area. So coming up with college support systems for students with autism. As I mentioned earlier, there's a shift from the Individuals with Disabilities Act to the Rehabilitation Act Section 504 and the Americans with Disabilities Act. Again, there's no longer an IEP in college. Services and accommodations are coordinated through the college's Office of Disability Services. Some colleges use a different wording for this office, but there is one office that coordinates services and accommodations for students. Documentation is needed for students to obtain services, and again, on that point of self-advocacy, it's the student's responsibility to request and advocate for services, as well as to ask to use them, for example, when they're in the classroom. Now I'm going to review some specific offices that are traditionally held on college campuses. All campuses are a little bit different in terms of what services are provided, but these are some of the main ones. The Office of Disability Services is kind of like a base office. It can help coordinate and help the student navigate other areas of services. The College Counseling Center is a great resource. They typically provide individual and group counseling, as well as really helpful seminars on topics such as stress management, coping skills, to study skills and time management. The Career Resources Office is another great area of support. They typically provide help in terms of career guidance and exploration, helping the student find a work-study program, helping the student find a job or explore jobs outside of campus, as well as work on important skills such as interviewing, resumes, and things like that. Tutoring and support labs are also typically available to provide one-on-one support. Also sometimes in a group setting, so it might be more of a lab setup where students are working on homework and there's a tutor who floats around and provides help as needed. Many schools have specialized services, and more are starting to provide specialized services for students with autism based on the growing need, and this is great because a lot of them have very specialized programs and understanding of what the needs of students with autism are. Professors can also be a great area of support, so having individual meetings with the professors, as well as getting involved in clubs and student activities. This kind of pulls into the point of focusing on the students' passions and really building that intrinsic motivation and helping them come up with a community of students that they can connect with. To review some of the different possible accommodations and modifications that are available, again, these would be first, you have to qualify and provide documentation to the Office of Disability Services, but once approved, different specific accommodations might be provided, such as note-taking in the classroom. So this might be another student that takes good notes that the student is able to access. Accessing the professor's notes, Getting books on tape, if the student is more of an auditory learner than actual reading, this could be a good one. Extended time on tests, so not just taking the test within an hour window, but having a little extra time. This is a big one, test taking in a low distraction environment. A lot of times students with autism, there can be a lot of environmental distractions that can impact their performance. So being able to take a test in a quieter room can be very helpful. Access to tape lectures and use of particular tools such as a calculator or computer are also can be available. It's also a good idea to make friends with the resident advisor or RA. So if the student is going to be living in a dorm, it's helpful for them to meet with the RA and just have an open communication about how the RA might be able to help them and understand what their more living needs are. But RAs are great resources. They can help facilitate the social, academic, and personal transition of the student. They can provide extra support as needed. If there's any issues with roommates, they can provide roommate mediation. But there are other living options besides dorms, such as an apartment, living at home. So you really do have to think about what living environment is going to be the best fit for the student and how you can best accommodate that with what options are available. In addition to all of these services that might be provided by the college, most likely as part of the transition plan, you're going to have to come up with some outside supports to kind of buffer any additional areas of need. So these might be things such as a private therapist that the student has worked with, or finding a new private therapist if the student is relocating. This could be a counselor, it could be a behavior therapist, someone who works mostly just on social skills. You'll also want to develop a home base. So this could include, say the student is relocating to a school next to a close family relative. You might want to think of their home base as this relative and the relative's home, so that they have a point person that they can connect with and who can kind of check in on them. Another support to think about is a private tutor. So if additional tutoring is needed outside of the college environment or more specialized tutoring, that's something to consider. Also, groups and meetup groups outside of the college can be, fun and helpful for the student, as well as recreational activities. There's a ton of different activities that are typically provided by the college, but again, it's important for the student to connect, whether it's in the college or outside, with some of their areas of interest so that they can have those social opportunities and meet students with similar interests and really just have fun. As I mentioned, a lot of schools are developing autism-specific programs. And just to go over, these are just a few of the examples I found when I was researching, but Texas Tech has the Burkhart Center for Autism. They have a transition program that involves internships, coaches, and student trainings. The College Living Experience and the College Internship Program are two private programs that aren't actual colleges, but they provide kind of comprehensive wraparound support in the areas of independent living, career resources, academic support, social support, and help assist with the transition to college. And students typically live within apartments or housing that are part of the program. Western Kentucky has a program called the Circle of Support College Program, which includes things such as tutoring, study skills, supports, and mentoring. Marshall also has a program specifically for students with autism that provides positive behavior support, person-centered planning, and academic and social supports. So there are a lot of great programs out there, and again, these are just a few of them. And if you do a search of students with autism in college on Google, there are a lot of great articles that really depict the success that many students are having. So here's an example of a student at Cal Western who passed the bar exam. But there's really a lot out there in it, and it's encouraging, and it shows that with the right supports, students can succeed. I like this one. It's about a student with autism who climbs to raise tuition for others who want to go to college. I'd like to touch on some of our resources, and again, we're going to be providing some more specific resources and references to this presentation on our blog. But here's the YouTube channel that has our previous presentations on it, and this presentation will be uploaded there as well as the Johnson Center. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter. I want to see if we have time for a few final questions. Yes, it looks like I can take a few, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up. Okay, here's a good one. This one says, I don't think my child would benefit from traditional counseling, but I like the idea of them meeting with a counselor for support. And I think it's good to know that a lot of college counseling centers these days are familiar with working with students on the autism spectrum and what their unique needs are. I worked at Texas State during my internship at the counseling center there, and I saw several students who were on the autism spectrum, and the staff there was familiar with working with them. But I think it's important to know that there are counseling staff that understand the unique needs of students with autism, and they can tailor counseling to meet their needs. For example, traditional talk therapy might not be the best fit for a lot of students, but using a more solution-focused, problem-solving approach would likely be beneficial. And outside of the traditional talk therapy, a lot of counseling can work on things such as developing coping skills, stress management, even to organization and some of those executive functioning type skills. Let's see, I'm going to take one more question. This one asks, I think a roommate would be too stressful for my child. What other options might be available in terms of living on campus? Students do have the option to request for a private dorm, so that would be one option. And then having a private dorm within a dormitory would provide the opportunity for socialization with other students who are living in the dorm, but they'd have their own private space. Traditionally, a lot of times it might be with a bigger shared bathroom. So looking into, if you want something even on a smaller scale, might be if there's dorms that are set up more in a suite style. So it might be 3 private rooms with a shared living room and kitchen and bathroom, so it's somewhat communal, but maybe not as communal as a whole dorm floor. So campuses do have a variety of different options that might better meet the needs than a traditional kind of roommate situation would. Okay, well, let's see. I want to go ahead and wrap up for today. Thank you for your time and attention. A few points that I just want to leave you with today are just to encourage everyone that with the right planning and support, we can set up students for success in college. It's important to take those small steps to start early and to break it down, and also continue with reevaluating what the needs are and supporting through the transition and while they're in college. because that's been identified as more of a risk area for students not to finish. Also, all students are unique in their own ways, so you really want to identify the unique passions and interests and strengths of the student to find the best fit and to really encourage their motivation to succeed. And I think all of this takes some level of creativity on the parts of parents and your support team and teachers in terms of developing the best program that's going to be the best support and best fit for the students. And I'd like to just thank everyone who helped me with the presentation today, and particularly Anissa Ryland for helping revamp the style of the presentation and with all of the exciting new graphics and animation. But thank you again for your time and attention, and I hope today's webinar was useful. And please tune in for our upcoming blog posts that'll have notes as well as helpful resources and references on the topic, as well as all of our other webinars and presentations. Have a good day.